most recent Evolutions video, I utilized Porygon 2's Energy Converter in order to make sure that each evolution has the type of energy it needs in order to attack. But while I was building that deck, and even while I was working on the upload, I was thinking, you could just do this to another Potpourri deck, and it could potentially be even better. Especially when the base of your Potpourri deck is Brock's Ninetales, whose Shapeshift ability basically lets you evolve Brock's Ninetales into any evolution card you can lay on top of it. This is more advantageous than evolving the normal way, because on the same turn that you evolve from Brock's Vulpix into Brock's Ninetales, you can also lay down that evolution card, so you can essentially get a stage 2 out one turn earlier. Also, because it's Brock's Ninetales, it will allow you to attach Brock's Protection and keep those energies safe from any energy removals. So the question became, what types of evolution cards would I want to utilize to make this deck as versatile and playable as possible? Well, it was easy to rule out a lot of stage 2s that rely on their Pokemon powers to be good, as when you shapeshift from Brock's Ninetales into one of those evolution cards, it does not include its power because the power is going to stay as shapeshift. Another sticking point here is that you can discard that evolution card at any point on your turn, and you can put more than one evolution card on Brock's Ninetales as long as it's only one per turn. However, the Shapeshift ability will only apply to whichever Pokemon you played most recently. So if you have a Jumpluff attached to Brock's Ninetales and then you attach a Steelix, you will no longer be able to access the moves from that Jumpluff. And because using Shapeshift does not count as evolving Ninetales, you can't really use cards like Kingdra because its genetic memory wouldn't have anything to pull from. Instead, the attack would just fail. Now, you still would be able to use Twister, but that's not exactly what made this Kingdra good. So I ended up choosing what I thought was a pretty eclectic bunch of evolution cards. That way you could incorporate a lot of different playstyles into the deck. The first of which being Dark Fluffy, which has two really great utility moves. For 1 energy high voltage, deals a little bit of damage, and also you have a chance to stop your opponent from playing trainers next turn, which is pretty huge if you can hit that coin flip. And Stun Wave is the same. 30 damage for 2 energy is good by itself, but you have the added effect of a Goop Gas attack. So if there's a problematic Pokemon power on your opponent's active, you can go ahead and shut that down with this Dark Fluffy. It's like that Fossil Psyduck and Neogenesis Magby rolled into one Pokemon. The next is Clefable, probably one of the best coverage Pokemon you're gonna find in base Neo, especially since Metronome only requires 1 energy of any type. Its power is in its simplicity in that it can basically screw over your opponent with their own attacks earlier than they can get those attacks set up. It is a perfect card for rogue decks, for Potpourri decks, and it works especially well in an evolution deck where versatility is key. The next evolution I've included is Crobat. This is a card that is just too good to not include when you can play it on turn 2, get that triggered poison off for 1 energy, dealing 20 damage, which is great by itself, but also if your opponent plays an energy on that Pokemon on their next turn, that Pokemon's now poisoned, creating a penalty on your opponent's side for getting set up. So if they do choose to try to attach energy to that Pokemon, get it set up, then they're going to be racking up more damage between turns unless they have a way to get rid of that poison afterwards, like evolving. More than likely, you're going to be forcing your opponent to retreat, in which they just start setting up a different Pokemon, but in doing so, you can just force them to swap back and forth over and over again to avoid the poison while racking up chip damage while you do it on all of their Pokemon. So far, all of these evolutions have been 1 energy attackers that serve a specialized purpose, like stopping trainers or forcing a switch or countering big attacks on opposing Pokemon. With Dark Gengar, its pull-in attack uses 3 energy, but it's just as specialized as any of the other cards, as if you pull in a baby off of the bench, you can deal 30 damage to it without flipping a coin, and that is huge. According to the Wizards of the Coast rulings, the effect of pull-in only affects your opponent's active. You're only applying the effect to the active, even though it's the Pokemon that's being pulled from the bench that is actually taking the damage and the effect of the attack. You know, on this one, I'm not going to argue with them. Even if you're not in the business of OHKOing babies, it's still a great attack that can pull any Pokemon off of your opponent's bench, deal 30 damage, and put them to sleep. Guaranteed sleep is a huge factor in why Pull In is such a great addition to this deck, because if your opponent doesn't know what evolution cards you're using, this can come out of nowhere. For similar reasons, the last evolution card I've included is Blanes Charizard. While Fluffy and Crobat are going to be able to deal some really early game chip damage and get those specialty effects going, Blanes Charizard and Dark Gengar are going to be your mid to late game cleanup crew, where Blanes Charizard, you do have to flip a coin for Flame Jet, but it's dealing more damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon you choose, and it does have more HP than Dark Gengar, even though with Dark Gengar you do have the guaranteed 30 damage and the guaranteed sleep. Either way, all of that chip damage from early game can really rack up on your opponent's side of the field, and by attacking any Pokemon you want directly with Flame Jet or Pull In, you can turn a lot of games into just a pure sweep just by laying down a Charizard or Dark Gengar. Those are the 5 evolution cards I chose to use for this build of this deck, but just know that you can use any 5 evolution cards from base Neo that you want to construct your own version of this deck. And there are a lot of options to choose from for your evolution cards, and then you also have tools like Rainbow Energy and Porygon 2 that will make it to where you can use as many different types of Pokemon as you want. So with the explanation of my evolution choices out of the way, let's get into the rest of the deck. This deck has a lot of components at play, so you still are going to need to rely on Cleffa to get all of those cards for your setup. It is a pretty simple setup that you can get done relatively quick. I had no trouble getting the evolution card that I wanted in my hand and in play on turn 2 most of the time. What can be a little more trouble is getting a second Brock's Ninetales set up, just in case that something goes wrong with that first one. You usually run through quite a bit of your deck just getting all of the Porygon 2, the Brock's Ninetales, and whichever evolution cards you want to get into your hand as quickly as possible. For the Porygon line, I'm using 3 Porygon from the Rocket set, 2 Porygon 2 with that energy converter ability that will transform a basic energy card into any other type of basic energy you want, and then 1 copy of Dark Porygon 2, which off of a coin flip can allow you to take a stadium card out of your discard and put it back in play. This will allow you the chance to swap between beneficial and non-beneficial stadium cards. That way you have an advantage on your turn that your opponent can't take advantage of on their turn. Using a full playset of Brock's Vulpix and full playset of Brock's Ninetales just to make sure you have those cards readily available. Even if one of those gets prized, you're immediately at a disadvantage with your setup. So you can't really afford to run less than a playset of each. Now with Brock's Ninetales, you can attach multiple evolution cards to it, so even if you're stuck with only having 2 or 3 Brock's Ninetales available, you can still utilize each of the 5 evolution cards I've included in this build off of just those 2 or 3. Now if you want to cycle them in order to reuse, the different utilities that each of them have, you will have to discard them and then fetch them back out of your discard with something like a Nightly Garbage Run. You'll notice a few little shakes. I had a very curious kitten that kept wanting to rub its face all over the camera dock while I was recording. There it is. But I've already talked about each of these evolutions individually and why they're in the deck, so just kind of go rapid fire here with laying them down. The main point is figuring out exactly how you want to attach them to Brock's Ninetales. If you do want to attach multiple to a single one, I don't really recommend it unless you have to. Preferably you're able to decide early game which evolution cards are going to be most useful, which are going to make the biggest impact, and go ahead and get up 2 or 3 Brock's Ninetales set up with separate evolution cards on them. That way you can just retreat from one into the other instead of having to stack on top of each other and discard those evolution cards, eventually having to fetch them right back out of your discard if you wanted to use them again. And depending on how aggressive your opponent is with playing counter stadiums, you may not even want to use Dark Porygon 2 all that much. Typically I would just get 1 Porygon 2 set up pretty early game, and then later down the line, if I was having trouble getting rid of any stadiums my opponent was putting into play, that's when I would typically utilize Dark Porygon 2 and start using that trick of using Energy Stadium on your turn, and then once you've done everything, replacing it with a Chaos Gem in your discard pile. That way your opponent doesn't have the same advantage going into their turn. This is a deck where you don't want to have to discard cards very often because each card in this deck plays a role. So Professor Oak may force you to get rid of a evolution card you're going to need later in the game just in order to get a new hand. And so that's why I only use 3 copies of Professor Elm. That way you're just reshuffling in and you're not really losing any of those resources, though it may take a little while to get one back into your hand. Full playset of Pokemon Trader, however, because having the right evolution in your hand when you need it early game is very important. So that's why there's a full playset in here. It's going to let you move a little more freely between the different evolutions. Sometimes you might have 2 Porygon 2s in your hand when you really only need 1 on your bench, and so you're able to use Trader to swap that out for a Brock's Ninetales, or maybe something that it's going to shapeshift into at the right moment. And I've learned in these last couple of weeks of playtesting that EXP ALL with Porygon 2 is an amazing little combo for any Potpourri deck. So you would attach EXP ALL to one of your bench Pokemon, and if your active Pokemon's knocked out, then one of the basic energy cards attached to it goes to that bench Pokemon. And so in that way, you can just start stacking up energy on a Brock's Ninetales, knowing that you're going to be evolving it into a Dark Gengar or a Blanes Charizard. Early game, if you're only attaching 1 energy to Brock's Ninetales to utilize a Dark Fluffy, a Clefable, or a Crobat, your opponent may think that all of your evolution cards are just 1 energy attackers, but then you can surprise them late game and throw down one of these sweeper cards, and they're not going to be able to discard those energy either because you have Brock's Protection in here to help. And your opponent won't really have a way to discard Brock's Protection other than knocking out that Pokemon. And this is where one shortcoming of the deck does come up, as I only run 3 copies of Brock's Protection and I don't have Item Finder in this deck. I just couldn't really find the room for it. All of the other cards seemed way more essential. 2 copies of Nightly Garbage running here just to get back some of those evolution cards and basic energy cards that you need. That way Porygon 2 can use its power on them. So if there's a part of this deck that you think you can stand to cut out, I would definitely recommend either putting a 4th copy of Brock's Protection in here or running a couple of Item Finders. That way you can recycle them if you need to. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be running 2 copies of Energy Stadium and 1 copy of Chaos Gem. That way you can utilize Dark Porygon 2's power in order to switch between them freely, off of coin flips of course, but still allowing you to switch between them. That way you can give yourself as much of an advantage as you can while putting your opponent at as much of a disadvantage as you can. But Energy Stadium will just serve as another means of getting back those specific energy cards that you need from your discard, just in case you do have to discard some to retreat, or if your opponent does get some energy removals off that you're not able to stop with Brock's Protection. To finish off the deck, I'll be using 5 Fire Energy, 5 Grass Energy, and 6 Psychic Energy. A little more on the Psychic side because that Dark Gengar's pull-in attack is going to be your clincher late game. And for Gengar, having those 3 specific energy is a lot more important than the other ones because Porygon 2's power is only going to be able to affect 1 energy at a time. So you need to make sure that at least 2 of the energy on Dark Gengar are Psychic Energy. But EXP ALL really helps in this regard, as with Fluffy, Clefable, and Crobat, you can attach any kind of energy you want on there as long as you have a Porygon 2 on your bench. That way you can transform that energy into what's actually needed. For Gengar, you can transfer any Psychic Energy that you've used to utilize one of those 1 energy attacks on the early game Pokemon and go ahead and transfer those onto the Brock's Ninetales that you plan to transform into a Dark Gengar. And you'll notice no Lightning Energy in this deck. That's because Dark Fluffy is only going to require 1 energy. You should be able to set up a Porygon 2 fast enough that as soon as you lay down the Fluffy, you can also transform whatever energy is attached to it. For the same reason, you could cut the Grass Energy out completely if you wanted to as well. Just run this deck full Fire and Psychic, since those are the only types of energy that you're going to need multiple of. But for the sake of just early game availability and how crucial Crobat can be early game, I just went ahead and left them in there. I don't want to go through every other valuable evolution card that could serve a purpose in this deck or for any alternate strategies, but I will go ahead and say I have another really fun build of this deck that utilizes Dark Fluffy, Dark Gengar, Dark Golduck, and Dark Typhlosion with a full playset of Boss's Way instead of computer search. That way you have a much easier, faster way to search out your evolution cards, as all 4 of these cards are searchable with Boss's Way, as well as Dark Porygon 2. And this is more of a coverage deck straight up, as you can hit for multiple weaknesses and tailor your Dark evolutions to whatever your opponent's playing. But I would love to see down in the comments what you guys choose as your key evolution cards if you're going to run this Brock's Ninetales Rainbow Evolution deck. I'm sure there's a bunch of evolution cards that I didn't get around to actually play testing with this build. Links to all my socials are down in the description. Big thanks to everyone for watching and liking and subscribing. I look forward to putting up new videos and hearing what people have to say. So until then, bye.